Many centuries ago, there was a man who made a surprising decision. He wasn't a king, nor a warrior. He was just an ordinary man, but with extraordinary faith. His name was Noah. But why, out of all the men, did God choose Noah? And what led him to build a colossal ark to face an event no one could have imagined? To understand Noah's decision, we need to go back to the beginning. The earth was corrupt in God's sight. It was filled with violence. Humanity had strayed so far from its creator that their hearts were filled with wickedness, and their ways were distant from divine purposes. What I'm about to tell you seems unbelievable, something that challenges human comprehension, but it's the truth that shaped the world you live in today. Imagine a place where peace had been replaced by chaos, where violence and corruption ruled every aspect of life. This was the world I lived in, a world where people had completely turned away from God, giving way to selfishness and cruelty. In this devastated land, only my family and I remained, the last survivors of a civilization that had lost its way. The destruction was so vast and sudden that I often wonder how everything happened so quickly. It was as if the forces of the universe had united to bring about a catastrophe of unimaginable proportions. Everyone, except my family, was swept from the face of the earth. The scale of the destruction was unfathomable, and the loss of life was devastating. It was in this setting that I, Noah, was chosen to play a crucial role. Believe me, it wasn't easy to understand what was happening. Everything around me was collapsing, but at the same time, a mission was entrusted to me. The mission to preserve what was left, to save a fraction of creation so that, after the storm, a new beginning would be possible. The world was in an unimaginable condition, one that perhaps even the angels, in their heavenly wisdom, could not have foreseen. If you could picture the chaos, despair, and desolation that followed, you might begin to grasp what Noah and his family experienced. The sky, which was once a calm blanket of blue, was now dark and threatening, as if nature itself mourned for humanity. The sound of life, which once echoed in the villages, cities, fields, and forests, had been replaced by a heavy, ominous silence, interrupted only by the relentless roar of the waters. The world as it was known, with all its complexities, relationships, cultures, and dreams, had been swallowed by a flood of unimaginable proportions. It wasn't just a simple storm, it was a divine judgment, a complete cleansing, a reset. And at the center of this chaos was Noah, a simple but righteous man who had found favor in the eyes of God. Noah's journey began long before the first raindrop fell. He had already noticed the decay around him, the corruption that had taken over the hearts of men. Every day, he witnessed the growing wickedness, the violence, and the moral degradation that spread like a plague. What Noah saw was a world in ruins, where greed and selfishness had replaced kindness and compassion. People had forgotten the God who created them, and instead sought only to satisfy their insatiable desires. The scriptures tell us that the earth was corrupt in God's sight and full of violence. Noah, however, remained steadfast in his faith. He was different from the others, and this did not go unnoticed. While everyone around him was sinking into sin, Noah walked with God. He was a man of integrity in a depraved generation, and because of this, God decided to spare him and his family from the destruction that was to come. It was amidst this corruption that God spoke to Noah, revealing a plan that was as astonishing as the state of the world itself. God announced that he would destroy the earth and all living beings with a flood. However, he also revealed a path to salvation. Noah was to build an ark, a gigantic vessel that would shelter him, his family, and representatives of all animal species during the flood. It would be, quite literally, a floating refuge in the midst of the greatest storm the world had ever seen. Imagine the challenge Noah faced upon hearing these instructions. He was an ordinary man, and the task God gave him seemed almost impossible. Building an ark of gopher wood, immense in size and complexity, would be a gigantic undertaking. And more so, He had to do this while the rest of the world went on with their lives as if nothing was happening, oblivious to the impending disaster. As Noah worked, his neighbors mocked him. They saw an old man, busy with an absurd construction, warning of a flood they never believed would come. To them, Noah was a madman, lost in his religious delusions. But Noah continued, blow after blow, hammering the wood, following God's instructions with unwavering determination. He knew he was preparing the only possible salvation in a world destined for destruction. The construction of the ark took years, even decades, and throughout that time, Noah continued to preach, warning people about what was to come. But his words fell on deaf ears. No one was willing to believe the message Noah was conveying. They continued with their lives, marrying, giving in marriage, celebrating, living without worry. They couldn't see the storm that was approaching. Finally, the ark was completed, immense, sturdy, and fully prepared to face the flood that was coming. Noah and his family entered the ark, followed by 2 of every species of animal. God closed the door of the ark, sealing the fate of the outside world. And then, the flood began. The rain fell with an intensity that no one had ever seen. The waters burst forth from the depths of the earth, and in no time, all of creation was submerged. What began as a torrential rain soon turned into an uncontrollable flood, sweeping everything in its path. The mountains, once towering, were submerged. Life, in all its diversity and beauty, was erased from the pages of history. But while the world perished, the ark floated. Noah, his family, and all the animals that had entered the ark were safe. They were the only survivors of a catastrophe that had purged the world of its corruption. Noah, the righteous man, had found favor in God's eyes, and because of this, he and his family became the new guardians of life on earth. The story of Noah and the flood is not just about destruction, but also about renewal. The old world was washed away, and in its place, a new creation would emerge, a new chance for humanity. And it all began with the unwavering faith of a man who chose to walk with God, even when everyone around him had lost their way. Long ago, before the world was shaped by the hands of God, there existed a divine plan for the cosmos. At the heart of this plan were the angels, celestial beings created with the singular purpose of serving and worshiping the Creator. They were designed to live eternally in heaven, a realm of light and glory, where their existence would be dedicated to glorifying God and fulfilling His commands. Heaven was their home, a place of indescribable beauty and perfect harmony. But among these beings of light, one began to stray from the path set by God, igniting a rebellion that would bring catastrophic consequences to the world. Among the angels, there was one who was particularly notable for his beauty and power. He stood out among his brethren, but this excellence planted in him the seed of pride. Instead of being content with his glorious position in heaven, he began to desire something more. He wanted to be like God, perhaps even superior to Him. Fueled by this boundless pride, he rebelled against his Creator. This angel, whose name would later be known as Satan, led an insurrection against God, dragging with him 1/3 of the celestial angels. The rebellion in heaven was a monumental event. What had been a realm of peace was transformed into a battlefield. Angels who had once shared the same light and purity now found themselves on opposite sides of a cosmic conflict. Satan and his followers, now fallen angels, were defeated and cast out of heaven. But their fall did not mark the end of their influence. On the contrary, the banishment of the rebels marked the beginning of a new chapter, where the stage for their actions would be earth and humanity. The fallen angels, stripped of their glory and heavenly abode, wandered through creation, seeking a new way to gain power and influence. They turned their gaze to earth, a world still in its infancy, but already home to the first forms of life created by God. Among these forms of life, humanity stood out, especially cherished by the Creator, who had made them in His image and likeness. Satan, cunning and vengeful, realized that the best way to continue his war against God would be to corrupt that which he loved most, humanity. Thus, he infiltrated the Garden of Eden, the earthly paradise where Adam and Eve lived in perfect harmony with God. Disguised as a serpent, Satan approached Eve, seducing her with promises of wisdom and power. He lied, insinuating that God was withholding something grand from them by forbidding them from eating the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Eve, deceived by the serpent's seductive words, ate the forbidden fruit and then offered it to Adam. With this act of disobedience, sin entered the world, and with it, the curse of suffering, pain, and death. Adam and Eve were expelled from Eden, and paradise was lost. Having corrupted the first humans, Satan continued his destructive work on earth, using the fallen angels to expand his kingdom of darkness. The fallen angels, now known as demons, did not stop there. They began to interact directly with humans, drawn by the daughters of men, whose beauty captivated them. Abandoning their heavenly abode, these fallen angels took human women as wives, and from these unions, the Nephilim were born, a race of giants, powerful and feared. The Nephilim were extraordinary beings, possessing immense strength and imposing stature, but with a corrupt nature that reflected the rebellion of their parents. They soon became a devastating influence on earth, spreading violence and chaos. Wherever they were, destruction followed, and humanity, already inclined to sin, was dragged further away from God. Over time, the earth became a place of corruption and wickedness. The violence of the Nephilim and the malign influence of the fallen angels turned the world into a den of sin, where purity and goodness were rare and almost non-existent. The creation, which had been good in the eyes of God, was now distorted and ruined. God, seeing the depravity that had taken hold of the world, regretted the creation of humanity. The earth, originally conceived as a place of beauty and life, was now full of death and destruction. A judgment was necessary, a purification that would restore order and justice. It was then that God decided to bring the great flood, a cataclysm that would sweep away all wickedness from the face of the earth. Noah, a righteous and upright man, was chosen to be the instrument of salvation, building an ark that would preserve life during the judgment. But before the floodwaters covered the world, the influence of the fallen angels and the Nephilim had already sealed the fate of the old humanity. The story of the fallen angels and their rebellion serves as a grim reminder of the power of pride and disobedience. Even the highest beings can fall when they stray from God's will. And when they fall, the consequences are felt throughout creation. After Satan's rebellion and the subsequent fall of the angels, the earth was forever changed. Adam and Eve, the first humans created by God, bore the direct consequences of the disobedience they had chosen. Expelled from the Garden of Eden, they were forced to face a new reality, a life marked by hard labor, pain, and eventually death. The curse of the land was God's punishment for their disobedience, and this curse would not only affect Adam and Eve but all of their descendants. In his anger and sorrow over their betrayal, God pronounced the sentence, "Cursed is the ground because of you. Through painful toil you will eat food from it all the days of your life. It will produce thorns and thistles for you, and you will eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your brow you will eat your food until you return to the ground, since from it you were taken. For dust you are, and to dust you will return." These words sealed humanity's fate, transforming the world into a place of constant struggle and suffering. Before the fall, Adam and Eve lived in perfect harmony with creation. The fertile soil of Eden produced fruit abundantly without effort. However, outside of Eden, the reality was harsh. The now cursed land resisted cultivation. Thorns and thistles sprang up where once useful plants grew. The work that had once been a blessing became a burdensome toil, necessary only to ensure basic survival. Over time, Adam and Eve had sons and daughters, and the family grew. Their sons, Cain and Abel, were the first to experience the hardships of the post-fall world. Cain, the firstborn, worked as a farmer, while Abel became a shepherd. But even at the dawn of civilization, sin was already deeply rooted. Cain, consumed by jealousy and anger, killed his brother Abel, committing the first murder in human history. This act of violence marked the beginning of a troubled human civilization, one that would be characterized by a struggle not only against the cursed land, but also against the darker impulses within the human heart. The legacy of Adam and Eve's disobedience thus set the stage for a world where pain, toil, and moral conflict would define the human experience. As the world progressed after the fall of Adam and Eve, humanity began to multiply and spread across the earth. The descendants of Adam and Eve, both from the godly lineage of Seth and the corrupt lineage of Cain, grew and formed the first human communities. This was a time vastly different from what we know today, a time when human beings lived for centuries, a reflection of the vitality that still lingered from the original creation. Adam, the first man, lived for 930 years, a number that seems incredible to us but was common among the patriarchs of that era. These early men and women had a profound connection with the earth and with God, a legacy that traced back to Eden before the fall. They had an intrinsic understanding of things that seem mysterious to us today: how to cultivate the land, care for animals, and live in harmony with the natural world. The wisdom accumulated over their long lives allowed them to develop skills and knowledge that would be passed down from generation to generation. However, even these extraordinary patriarchs were not immune to the problems that often plague humanity. The sin that had entered the world through Adam and Eve continued to spread, growing and taking deeper root in human society. As generations passed, sin took on various forms: jealousy, anger, deceit, and even violence. The murder of Abel by Cain was only the beginning of a long history of human transgressions. Despite the longevity and wisdom of these early men, the moral and spiritual corruption of the world could not be contained by knowledge or advanced age alone. Humanity, with its long and abundant lives, often used this time not to seek God, but to delve deeper into their own passions and selfish desires. Men built cities, explored new territories, and accumulated wealth, but often at the expense of justice and righteousness. The story of Enoch, the great-grandfather of Noah, stands out as an exception amid the growing darkness that was beginning to overtake the world. Enoch was a man who walked with God, one of the few who remained faithful in a time of increasing wickedness. His life of devotion was so intense that God took him away, sparing him from physical death, a sign that even amid chaos, faithfulness to God did not go unnoticed. Enoch prophesied about the coming judgment, speaking of the world's corruption and warning of the divine punishment that would inevitably fall upon the wicked. On the other hand, Methuselah, Enoch's son and Noah's grandfather, is primarily remembered for his longevity. He lived 969 years, making him the oldest man mentioned in the Bible. His name, which means when he dies it will happen, seems to have been a prophecy about the flood that would come soon after his death. Methuselah represents God's patience and long-suffering, as the judgment on the earth was delayed for nearly 1,000 years, giving time for repentance. As the years passed, the generations of holy and righteous men began to disappear. The world, once young and vigorous, began to show signs of wear, both physically and morally. The men, blessed with extraordinarily long lives, often used their time to deepen their rebellion against God rather than return to Him. Sin continued to spread, eroding humanity's morality and obscuring the purity that had characterized the first generations. Violence became rampant, and the hearts of men were continually inclined toward evil. People were often cruel to one another, and their actions were filled with deceit, theft, and even murder. Despite this, God always maintained a remnant, a lineage of people who, like Enoch, remained faithful. Through the lineage of Seth, which included figures like Enoch and Noah, the promise of redemption and hope was kept alive. However, the prevalence of sin was such that God himself began to regret the creation of humanity. The world was deteriorating rapidly, both in terms of its moral purity and its original vitality. With the increase of wickedness, God saw that there was no other solution but to bring judgment upon the earth, a judgment that would cleanse the world of corruption and allow for a new beginning. This judgment would be the great flood, and Noah, a righteous man in the midst of general depravity, would be the instrument of salvation. Thus, the story of the long lives of the patriarchs is both a tale of blessing and a warning. Their long lives allowed for great achievements and an accumulation of wisdom that would be invaluable for future generations. However, these same long lives also gave sin enough time to root itself deeply in humanity, leading it further away from God. The world, initially created in perfection, was now on the brink of total destruction, desperately in need of redemption. The mark of Cain's sin extended through generations. He was cursed by God, and his descendants became synonymous with evil and violence. The lineage of Cain, marked by rebellion and estrangement from God, contrasted with the godly lineage of Seth, the third son of Adam and Eve. It was through Seth that God preserved a line of men and women who sought to live according to his commandments. As humanity spread across the earth, families grew and began to form clans and tribes. Civilization began to take shape with the development of new skills and crafts. People learned to domesticate animals, cultivate the land more efficiently, and build more permanent shelters. The first cities began to emerge, and with them, human culture flourished. However, as civilization advanced, so did sin, violence, deceit, and idolatry became commonplace. Humanity, in its growing arrogance, distanced itself further and further from God. The descendants of Cain built cities and developed skills in metallurgy and music, but they used these gifts to glorify themselves rather than God. Moral and spiritual corruption continued to grow, fueled by pride and the thirst for power. Meanwhile, the lineage of Seth remained faithful to God. Among his descendants was Enoch, a man who walked with God and was taken up before experiencing death, a sign of divine approval. Yet, despite the faithfulness of some, the wickedness of the world continued to expand. As generations passed, the difference between the godly line of Seth and the wicked line of Cain became more pronounced. However, even within the lineage of Seth, the corruption of the world began to take its toll. The intermingling between the descendants of the sons of God, the lineage of Seth, and the daughters of men, the lineage of Cain, contributed to the growing wickedness on the earth. It was in this setting of increasing sin and corruption that Noah was born, a direct descendant of Seth. He grew up in a world where evil was rampant, but managed to maintain his integrity and righteousness. The earth was filled with violence, and sin had corrupted even the purest hearts. But God, in his mercy, chose Noah to be the savior of his creation, the one who would carry humanity and animal life through the great flood that was to come. The curse of Adam was a pivotal moment in human history, shaping the course of all civilization. Hard work, pain, and death became integral parts of the human experience. But it was also through these hardships that faith and perseverance were tested and strengthened. Even in the midst of darkness, hope remained, embodied in God's promise to restore creation and bless those who remained faithful to him. Noah was born into a world already deeply marred by sin. He was a direct descendant of Seth, the godly lineage that, over generations, had maintained a close relationship with God. However, despite this spiritual heritage, the world around him was rapidly deteriorating. Corruption, violence, and wickedness had spread everywhere, contaminating even the souls of the righteous. As the global population grew, the line between good and evil became increasingly blurred. The sons of God, who belonged to the lineage of Seth, began to intermingle with the daughters of men, the descendants of Cain. This mixing of the godly with the wicked gave rise to an increasingly degenerate society. What was once a clear division between those who followed God and those who turned away from him became obscured, contributing to the unprecedented spread of sin. During this era of decline, the Nephilim emerged, a race of giants born from the union between fallen angels and the daughters of men. The Nephilim were powerful beings, feared and often worshipped by people. But though they were great in stature and strength, they were deeply corrupted in spirit. They further intensified the violence and chaos on earth, making human society a reflection of their own depravity. The presence of the Nephilim and the influence of the fallen angels made the world a nearly unrecognizable place. Where there had once been some semblance of order and justice, anarchy now reigned. Men became obsessed with their own selfish desires, pursuing power, wealth, and pleasure at any cost. Violence became endemic, and people turned against each other in acts of unending cruelty. God, observing this downward spiral, was deeply grieved. He saw that the wickedness of man was great on the earth, and that every thought and intention of the human heart was continually evil. The earth, which he had created with such care and love, was now corrupted beyond recognition. The very fabric of society was worn and torn by wickedness and violence. God regretted creating humanity and decided that a severe judgment was necessary to purify the earth and restore some semblance of order. In this dark context, Noah stood out as a man of righteousness and integrity amidst the general corruption. He walked with God, following his commandments and keeping himself separate from the wicked practices of his generation. Noah was different, and God noticed this difference. While the rest of humanity indulged in sin, Noah sought God and lived according to his principles. Despite his righteousness, Noah was not a perfect man. He lived in a world so deeply corrupted that even the most righteous among men were, in some way, touched by sin. However, the crucial difference was that Noah constantly sought God's guidance and strove to live in obedience to him. God decided to spare Noah and his family from the judgment he was about to unleash on the earth. He instructed Noah to build an ark, a massive vessel that would serve as a refuge during the impending flood. The construction of the ark was a monumental task, requiring decades of hard work and unwavering faith. Noah obeyed all of God's instructions, meticulously following every detail of the ark's design. During the years that Noah was building the ark, he also preached to the people around him, warning them of the coming judgment and urging them to repent. However, his words fell on deaf ears. Society was so deeply corrupted that no one, apart from his own family, heeded Noah's message. They mocked him, calling him crazy for building such a large vessel on dry land, far from any body of water. Finally, the day of judgment arrived. Noah, his family, and the animals that God had sent entered the ark, and God shut the door behind them. The floodgates of heaven opened, and the waters of the flood covered the entire earth. Every living being that was not on the ark perished. The flood cleansed the earth of corruption and sin, destroying all that was evil, but preserving Noah and his family as a new beginning for humanity. After the flood, Noah emerged into a transformed world. The judgment had been fulfilled, and the earth was now ready for a fresh start. God established a covenant with Noah, promising never again to destroy the earth with a flood and placing the rainbow in the sky as a sign of this promise. Noah and his sons were tasked with repopulating the earth, beginning a new era in human history. The story of Noah and the corruption of humanity is a powerful reminder of the seriousness of sin and the justice of God. At the same time, it is also a story of hope and redemption, showing that even in the midst of the greatest darkness, God always preserves a faithful remnant that he uses to fulfill his purposes. Noah, a righteous man in a corrupted generation, became the center of a divine plan aimed at purifying the earth and starting anew. As God observed the growing wickedness that consumed the world, he decided that the only way to restore creation was to bring a devastating judgment upon the earth. Yet, even in this act of justice, God's mercy shone through as he chose to preserve a remnant of humanity and animals through Noah. God communicated to Noah his intention to destroy the world with a flood. This was an incomprehensible concept at the time, as rain, as we know it today, had not occurred before. The earth was watered by a mist that rose from the ground, and the thought that waters would cover the entire surface of the planet was unimaginable. Nevertheless, Noah, driven by unwavering faith, believed God's word and prepared for what was to come. The Lord instructed Noah to build an ark, a massive vessel capable of housing his family and a vast collection of animals from every species. The construction of this ark would be a colossal undertaking, requiring decades of hard work, planning, and determination. Noah, 500 years old when he received this task, did not waver. He began building the ark exactly as God had specified. The ark was to be made of gopher wood, a resilient material that could withstand the destructive forces of the flood. God gave Noah precise measurements. The ark was to be 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high, which is approximately 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet high. This gigantic vessel, intended to float rather than sail, would have 3 decks, divided into compartments to house the animals and store food. Every detail of the ark was designed to ensure the survival of its occupants during the long months they would be adrift. The ark needed to be sealed with pitch inside and out to make it completely waterproof. Additionally, there was to be an opening 1 cubit below the roof to allow for ventilation, essential for the health of both the human and animal passengers. As Noah and his sons labored over the construction of the ark, he also preached to the people, warning them of the impending judgment. But the people, in their spiritual blindness, dismissed Noah's warnings, continuing in their wicked ways. The ark's construction became a visible and constant symbol of the coming condemnation. Yet no one outside Noah's family heeded the message. The task God gave Noah was both a test of obedience and a demonstration of his grace. Noah was isolated in his mission. Humanity, who should have supported and learned from him, chose instead to ridicule him. Yet Noah persevered, driven by his trust in God. For approximately 120 years, he worked tirelessly on the ark, during which he and his family were constantly mocked. Finally, the ark was completed, and the animals began to arrive, guided by a divinely implanted instinct. 2 by 2, they came from all parts of the world, from the fiercest predators to the most docile herbivores. 7 pairs of clean animals, and 2 of every unclean animal were gathered into the ark, according to God's instructions. This was a miracle in itself, demonstrating God's absolute control over all creation. The entry into the ark marked the end of an era. Noah, his wife, his 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their wives, along with all the animals, were shut inside the ark by God. The door was sealed not by human hands, but by God himself, an act symbolizing both the safety of those inside and the judgment of those outside. Once everyone was secure inside the ark, the floodgates of heaven opened, and the floodwaters began to fall. Along with the rains, the fountains of the great deep burst forth, bringing water from below to cover the entire earth. The flood lasted for 40 days and 40 nights, and the waters rose, covering even the highest mountains and destroying all life outside the ark. During this time, Noah and his family, along with the animals, were safe inside the ark while the world outside was annihilated. God had chosen Noah not only for his righteousness, but because he represented a new hope for humanity. Noah was the beginning of a new covenant between God and creation, a promise that destruction would not be the end, but rather a new beginning. The construction of the ark and the judgment that followed are powerful reminders of God's holiness, his infallible justice, and his immeasurable grace. Noah, in his faith and obedience, became an example for all future generations, a living testimony that faithfulness to God, even in the face of the world's disbelief and scorn, is the path that leads to salvation. With the ark completed, the time of judgment was fast approaching. The preparation for the flood was a crucial period, both for Noah and his family, and for humanity as a whole. While the world remained blind and indifferent to the impending disaster, Noah diligently followed the divine instructions with unwavering faith. God had commanded Noah to bring into the ark a pair of every unclean animal and 7 pairs of every clean animal, ensuring the survival and continuity of life after the flood. Noah's obedience to these instructions was vital for the divine plan to repopulate the earth. Additionally, Noah had to store enough food to sustain his family and all the animals during their time in the ark, which required meticulous planning and tireless effort. The days leading up to the flood were marked by intense activity, both practical and spiritual. Noah, with the help of his family, prepared the ark to receive the animals and stocked the necessary provisions. It was a monumental task, but Noah did not hesitate, fulfilling every detail according to God's instructions. Noah's faith was not merely passive belief. It manifested in concrete actions, in active obedience, and in work that seemed irrational to others but was perfectly logical in the context of faith. The animals began to arrive at the ark, coming from all parts of the world. Guided by an instinct implanted by God, they came in pairs, adhering to the natural order established by the Creator. It was an extraordinary spectacle. From the largest elephants to the smallest insects, all found their place within the ark. The order and organization and the arrival of the animals were clear signs of God's sovereign control over His creation. Nothing was left to chance. Every creature had a purpose and a place in that great plan of preservation. As Noah and his family prepared to enter the ark, the rest of humanity continued living as if nothing were about to happen. People carried on with their normal lives, eating, drinking, marrying, completely ignoring Noah's warnings. The construction of the ark, which should have been a sign of alarm, was seen as an eccentricity or even madness. To those watching from the outside, Noah seemed like a crazy old man, obsessed with a catastrophe that would never occur. But Noah knew that time was running out. He had spent years preaching to those around him, warning them of the impending judgment, but his words fell on deaf ears. Now, the time of grace was coming to an end. God had given humanity 120 years to repent, but His patience was reaching its limit. The judgment to come would be severe, and only those inside the ark would be spared. Finally, God gave the command for Noah, his family, and the animals to enter the ark. With calm and resolute obedience, Noah led everyone inside, following God's instructions down to the last detail. After all were inside, the door of the ark was closed, not by human hands, but by God Himself. This final act symbolized the end of the opportunity for salvation for the rest of humanity. Those inside the ark were protected, while those outside would face the full weight of divine judgment. The 7 days that followed their entry into the ark were filled with tense quiet. Noah and his family waited, trusting in God, even without knowing exactly when the flood would begin. Then, on the 7th day, the floodgates of heaven opened, and the waters of the deep burst forth. The rain fell unceasingly for 40 days and 40 nights, covering the entire earth and submerging even the highest mountains. Inside the ark, Noah and his family, along with all the animals, were safe. The ark floated on the waters that were destroying the world outside. Noah's faith, his obedience, and the meticulous preparation he undertook according to God's instructions saved his family and allowed life on earth to continue. Throughout the time that the waters prevailed, Noah and his family trusted in divine providence, waiting for the moment when the waters would begin to recede and the ark would finally come to rest. The preparation for the flood was more than just gathering resources or building a large ship. It was an exercise in faith, obedience, and perseverance. Noah demonstrated that true faith is manifested in actions, especially when those actions go against human logic and understanding. His story serves as an eternal example that, Even in times of great darkness and sin, obedience to God is the path to salvation. After years of preparation, the moment Noah had awaited finally arrived. The rain began to fall, first as a light drizzle, but soon it turned into an unrelenting downpour. At the same time, the springs of the great deep burst forth, and underground waters rose, quickly flooding the earth. For 40 days and 40 nights, the waters continued to rise, covering everything in their path. This was no ordinary event. It was a global cataclysm, an act of divine judgment that would forever alter the course of human history. Inside the ark, Noah, his family, and all the animals were safe, isolated from the chaos and destruction unfolding outside. The ark, with its sturdy construction designed specifically for this purpose, floated upon the waters, protecting its precious occupants. The atmosphere inside the ark must have been one of awe and reverence. The world they knew was being destroyed, but there, within that vessel, was hope for a new beginning. As the flood devastated the earth, everything that was not sheltered in the ark was destroyed. The waters rose so high that they covered even the highest mountains. All living creatures that inhabited the earth, people, animals, creeping things, birds, perished. The magnitude of this destruction was unimaginable. What had once been a world full of life was transformed into a vast expanse of water, with no trace of what existed before. Inside the ark, however, there was life. Noah and his family, along with the animals, represented the remnant chosen by God to repopulate the earth. Each passing day inside the ark was a testimony to God's faithfulness to those who trusted in him. The ark was not just a physical shelter. It was a symbol of divine care, a reminder that even in the midst of judgment, God preserves those who are faithful to him. During the 150 days that the waters prevailed, Noah and his family lived in total dependence on God. They had no control over what was happening outside the ark, nor did they know exactly how long they would be inside. What they did know was that God was in control and that he would guide them through this trial. Finally, God began to cause the waters to recede. The wind blew, and the waters started to slowly withdraw. After many days, the ark finally came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. Even then, Noah did not immediately leave the ark. He waited patiently, knowing that God would guide him when it was safe. Noah sent out a raven, which flew back and forth until the waters dried up. Then, he sent out a dove to see if the land had appeared. The dove returned without finding a place to perch, as the waters still covered the surface of the earth. Noah waited another 7 days and sent the dove out again. This time, it returned with an olive leaf in its beak, a sign that the waters were receding and that life was beginning to re-emerge. Noah waited another 7 days and sent the dove out one last time. When the dove did not return, Noah knew that the land was dry. Even so, Noah did not leave the ark until God gave the command. This reflects his total trust and obedience to God. When they finally received the divine command, Noah, his family, and all the animals left the ark to a completely transformed world. It was a new beginning, a rebirth for the earth and humanity. Upon leaving the ark, the first thing Noah did was build an altar to the Lord and offer sacrifices of thanksgiving. He knew that he had been spared not by his own merits but by God's grace. This act of worship and gratitude pleased God, who made a covenant with Noah and all of humanity. God promised never again to destroy the earth with a flood and placed the rainbow in the sky as a sign of this eternal covenant. The flood and salvation in the ark are, therefore, a powerful story of judgment and mercy. While the flood represented God's just retribution for rampant sin, the ark was the means of salvation for those who walked in righteousness. Noah and his family, being spared and preserved, became the new progenitors of humanity, responsible for repopulating and rebuilding the world. The story of the flood reminds us that even in the darkest times, God offers a path of salvation for those who follow him. After months of devastation, the flood finally began to recede, and the world emerging from the waters was a new and unfamiliar landscape, completely different from what Noah and his family had known before. The earth, once full of life and civilization, was now a blank canvas, ready to be renewed. This was a new beginning, a chance for humanity to start afresh under the guidance and protection of God. As the waters began to lower, the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat, a majestic mountain range located in what is now Turkey. This high point served as the first place of rest for the ark, a symbol of hope amidst the destruction. As time passed, Noah patiently waited for God's signal that it was safe to leave the ark. He knew that leaving prematurely could be dangerous, so he remained faithful, awaiting divine guidance. Noah sent out a raven, which flew back and forth until the waters had dried up enough for it to land. Then, he sent out a dove, which returned without finding a place to rest. This was a sign that there was still water on the earth. 7 days later, Noah sent the dove again, and this time it returned with an olive leaf in its beak, a symbol that the waters were receding and the earth was beginning to be reborn. After another 7 days, Noah sent the dove one last time, and when it did not return, he knew that the earth was dry. Despite these encouraging signs, Noah did not leave the ark until God gave the express command. And finally, God spoke to Noah, telling him that it was time for him, his family, and all the animals to leave the ark and begin their new lives on earth. When Noah, his wife, his sons, and their wives stepped out of the ark, they stood on a renewed earth, purified by the waters of the flood. Noah's first act upon leaving the ark was to build an altar to the Lord. He took some of the clean animals and clean birds and offered burnt offerings on the altar. This sacrifice was an act of gratitude and worship to God, acknowledging that they had been saved by His grace and mercy. The aroma of the sacrifice rose to the heavens, and God accepted it with pleasure, promising never again to curse the earth because of man, even knowing that the human heart is inclined to evil from youth. This divine promise was accompanied by a covenant. God established a covenant not only with Noah, but with all of humanity and all living creatures. As a sign of this covenant, God placed the rainbow in the clouds, a perpetual symbol of His promise never to destroy the earth with a flood again. Every time a rainbow appeared in the sky, it would be a visible reminder of God's commitment to humanity and all creation. Noah and his family now found themselves in the role of patriarchs of a new era. They had the responsibility to repopulate the earth and establish a new world order based on faithfulness to God. Noah's sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, would be the progenitors of all the nations that would arise from then on. God blessed Noah and his sons, telling them to be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth. This blessing echoed the words God had spoken to Adam and Eve at the beginning of creation, marking a new start for humanity. However, this new beginning also came with new responsibilities. God established new guidelines for humanity, including the respect for life. He permitted humans to eat meat, but with the condition not to consume the blood, for the blood represented life, which was sacred. Additionally, God instituted the principle of justice, declaring that whoever shed the blood of a man would have his blood shed, for man was made in the image of God. This was a measure to curb violence and preserve the dignity of human life, something that had been tragically lost before the flood. God's new covenant with Noah not only marked the restoration of the earth, but also reaffirmed God's sovereignty over creation and His ongoing commitment to humanity. Noah and his family stepped out of the ark into a fresh world where the previous corruption had been washed away, and where humanity had a new opportunity to live according to divine precepts. But this new world would also bring its challenges. The earth that Noah and his family found was one that needed to be cultivated again. They would have to rebuild their lives, establishing new communities and working the land to provide for their sustenance. God's promise never to destroy the earth with a flood again brought comfort and security, but it also required Noah and his descendants to live according to God's will, honoring the established covenant. Thus, The receding of the waters and the new beginning were not just the end of an era of destruction, but the start of a new phase in human history. A phase where God's grace would continue to guide and sustain those who trusted in Him, and where the responsibility to live according to His commandments would be crucial for the flourishing of life on earth. The story of Noah reminds us that even after severe judgment, God is always ready to restore, renew, and bless those who faithfully follow Him. After the ark finally rested on the mountains of Ararat, and the waters fully receded, Noah, his family, and all the animals emerged into a transformed world. The earth, once full of life, was now a desolate scene, ready for a new beginning. Noah's first act upon stepping onto this renewed ground was profoundly significant. He built an altar and offered sacrifices to the Lord. Noah carefully selected pure animals and birds, those God had instructed him to bring in greater numbers into the ark, and he sacrificed them as burnt offerings. This sacrifice was not only an offering of thanksgiving for surviving the flood, but also an act of worship and acknowledgement of God's sovereignty and mercy. Noah understood that his salvation was not due to his own righteousness, but to God's grace, and this sacrifice was an expression of that understanding. When the pleasing aroma of the sacrifice rose to the heavens, God accepted Noah's offering with delight. This moment marked a renewal of the covenant between God and humanity. Moved by Noah's sacrifice and the regenerated state of the world, God made a promise crucial to humanity's future. He said in his heart, "Never again will I curse the ground because of man, for the intention of man's heart is evil from his youth. Nor will I ever again destroy every living thing as I have done." This promise was an expression of divine mercy. God recognized the natural inclination of the human heart towards sin, but in His compassion, He decided never again to bring total destruction as He had with the flood, regardless of humanity's future failures. This was a unilateral commitment from God, reflecting His grace and love for His creation. In addition to this promise, God established an eternal covenant with Noah, his descendants, and all living creatures that had been in the ark. He declared that never again would floodwaters destroy the earth. As a sign of this covenant, God placed the rainbow in the clouds. The rainbow, with its beauty and vibrant colors, became a perpetual symbol of God's covenant with all creation. Whenever a rainbow appeared in the sky, it would serve as a reminder to both humanity and God of the divine commitment to preserve life on earth. This covenant was more than just a promise of non-destruction. It was a reaffirmation of God's relationship with humanity and the world He created. The rainbow served as a bridge between heaven and earth, a visible symbol of peace between God and His creation. It was a sign that even in a world where sin still existed, God's grace would always be present, offering ongoing hope for redemption and restoration. Noah's sacrifice also had profound implications for the future of worship and the relationship between God and humanity. This genuine act of worship, performed at a crucial moment of renewal, set a precedent for how humans could approach God, through sacrifices that acknowledged both the need for atonement for sin and gratitude for the blessings received. God's covenant with Noah was a milestone in human history, showing that while the earth had been purified by the flood, the inclination toward sin remained in human nature. However, God's response to this reality was no longer judgment and destruction, but a commitment to continue sustaining life, with the promise that He would never again destroy the earth in this manner. God also reiterated the blessing He had given to Adam and Eve at the beginning of creation. "Be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth." This blessing reaffirmed God's purpose for humanity, that they would flourish and rule the earth with responsibility and reverence. He gave Noah and his descendants permission to eat meat, but with the restriction not to consume the blood, for blood symbolized life, which was sacred. This was a reminder of the sanctity of life and the need for humans to live with an awareness of the value and sacredness of God's creation. Thus, the sacrifice and God's promise represented the beginning of a new era. Noah and his family were now tasked with repopulating the earth, living under the protection of God's covenant and mindful of the responsibility that this new opportunity brought. The world, purified by the flood, was ready for a fresh start, and God's covenant ensured that despite humanity's shortcomings, His commitment to creation would remain steadfast. This new beginning also came with a challenge. Humanity would have to learn to live according to God's commandments, respecting life and acknowledging His sovereignty over all things. Noah's sacrifice and God's response serve as a powerful example of how, even amid judgment, God's mercy and grace prevail, offering humanity a new chance to live in harmony with their Creator. After Noah and his family left the ark and began rebuilding their lives in the new world, a significant and sorrowful incident occurred, highlighting the complexities and challenges that still accompanied humanity, even after the flood. This event involved Noah, his sons and grandsons, and its consequences would echo throughout history. Noah, now an elderly man, began to cultivate the land, and one of his accomplishments was planting a vineyard. After some time, Noah harvested grapes and produced wine. One day, he drank from this wine and unknowingly became drunk. In his state of drunkenness, Noah disrobed and lay naked in his tent. This episode, which at first glance may seem trivial, triggered a series of events with lasting implications. Ham, Noah's second son and the father of Canaan, entered the tent and saw his father naked. Instead of covering Noah's nakedness or keeping the situation discreet, Ham went out and told his brothers, Shem and Japheth, about the condition in which he had found their father. Ham's behavior was seen as disrespectful and irreverent, as by exposing his father's state, he demonstrated a lack of honor and respect for paternal authority. Shem and Japheth, upon hearing what Ham had done, acted in the opposite manner. They took a garment, placed it on their shoulders, walked backward into the tent, so as not to see their father's nakedness, and covered Noah with the garment. This gesture showed the respect and reverence Shem and Japheth had for their father, sharply contrasting with Ham's attitude. When Noah awoke from his sleep and learned what had happened, he was deeply troubled. He recognized Ham's lack of respect and, in a moment of prophetic judgment, pronounced a curse on Canaan, Ham's son. Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants shall he be to his brothers. At the same time, Noah blessed Shem and Japheth, declaring that Canaan would serve them. This curse was not directed at Ham himself, but at his son Canaan, suggesting that the consequences of Ham's sin would be felt by future generations. Historically, the descendants of Canaan became known as the Canaanites, a people who would later face many conflicts with the Israelites, descendants of Shem. The curse of Canaan became a significant marker in the histories of nations, influencing the relations between peoples and subsequent biblical narratives. This post-flood incident revealed that despite the earth's renewal, man's sinful nature persisted. The flood physically purified the earth, but the human heart remained vulnerable to sin. The story of Canaan's curse and the actions of Ham, Shem, and Japheth serves as a reminder of the importance of respect, honor, and obedience within families and across generations. It also illustrates how individual choices and actions can have repercussions that extend far beyond the immediate moment, affecting the destiny of entire nations. Over time, after the dispersion of Noah's family and the growth of the human population, a powerful and ambitious leader named Nimrod emerged. He was Noah's great-grandson, being the son of Cush, who was the son of Ham. Nimrod distinguished himself as a mighty hunter before the Lord, but his power and influence extended far beyond his hunting skills. Nimrod became the founder of several of the first kingdoms in the post-flood world, including cities that would become famous and influential, such as Babel, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh, in the land of Shinar, the region of Mesopotamia. He is often remembered as the first great ruler and military leader, laying the foundations for the first human empires. However, Nimrod's legacy was not one of peace and obedience to God, but of rebellion and a quest for self-exaltation. The city of Babel, founded by Nimrod, became the center of one of the most famous events of human disobedience, the construction of the Tower of Babel. As the population grew and civilizations developed, the people began to take pride in their achievements. Driven by the desire to remain united and make a name for themselves, the inhabitants of Babel decided to build a tower that would reach the heavens. They said, "Let us build a city with a tower that reaches the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves and not be scattered over the face of the earth." This statement revealed their desire to defy divine order and avoid God's mandate to spread out and fill the earth. They wanted to centralize power and civilization in one place, rather than dispersing and tending to the earth as God had instructed. The tower itself, built of baked bricks and bitumen, represented human pride and the attempt to reach the divine without the need for God. This project was not just a physical construction. It symbolized humanity's rebellion against God's authority and their attempt to seek total autonomy. God, seeing the arrogance and disobedience of humanity, decided to intervene. He came down to see the city and the tower that the men were building, and in an act of both judgment and mercy, he confused their language. Until that moment, all humanity spoke one language, but now, with different languages, the workers could no longer understand each other. This halted the construction of the tower, and the people were forced to spread out over the earth, exactly as God had originally commanded. The unfinished tower and the dispersion of the peoples marked the end of humanity's attempt to build an empire based on pride and disobedience. Babel became a symbol of confusion and the futility of human ambitions when they opposed God's will. The name Babel came to mean confusion, reflecting the outcome of the failed attempt to unify humanity against the divine plan. This episode in human history serves as a powerful reminder of God's sovereignty over the nations and the limits of human ambition. While men may plan and build with great aspirations, it is God who decides the fate of their works. The story of Nimrod and the Tower of Babel teaches that any effort to build something in opposition to God's will is destined to fail. After the events of the flood and the dispersal of the peoples, Noah continued his life, becoming the patriarch of a new era. He lived for an additional 350 years after the flood, totaling 950 years of life, a reflection of the longevity of the early biblical patriarchs. Noah was the man who witnessed the transition from an old world, destroyed by sin, to a world renewed by God's mercy. During these post-flood years, Noah saw his children and grandchildren grow, multiply, and spread across the earth, fulfilling the divine command to repopulate the planet. He also lived to see the emergence of the First Nations, as well as the early signs of human disobedience, exemplified in the story of Nimrod and the Tower of Babel. Noah's life, marked by obedience and faith, serves as a model of devotion and righteousness amidst widespread corruption. His story is a powerful reminder that God is faithful and just, rewarding those who sincerely follow his commandments. Noah was not perfect, as shown in the episode of his drunkenness, but he was always a man who sought to live in accordance with God's will. Noah passed away knowing that he had fulfilled his role in God's divine plan. He was the instrument of the salvation of all earthly life and the initiator of a new era for humanity. The story of Noah teaches us about the importance of faith, obedience, and the responsibility we have to live according to God's principles, regardless of the circumstances around us.